Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for being here. Today I'm joined by Secretary Curley and Commissioner Farrell to give an update on our housing package. As most are aware, the many challenges we face are due to our demographics. Vermonters are aging out of the workforce with fewer kids and working age adults to replace them. To counter that, we need to attract more people to move to Vermont so we can reverse the trends we've seen for decades. But there's only so much we can do with such limited housing options. And the housing that is available isn't affordable. Now, I know we didn't get here overnight, and it's going to take a while to bring our housing stock to where it needs to be. This is why this issue must be acted on this session. The bottom line is we need to make it easier and less expensive to build. One way to do that is with regulatory reform. In particular, the housing appeals process, to make sure objections are legitimate and have merit. Last session, the legislature passed Act 181, which was a conservation bill, but did include some interim exemptions that were helpful. But unfortunately, these exemptions sunset in 2026, which doesn't give builders and developers enough predictability to make the substantial investments or acquire the financing needed to build. So my team is proposing we extend the exemptions to areas that already have water and wastewater, which makes a lot of sense. Another key piece of our housing bill will help rural communities. Spark is a financing tool that can fund things like infrastructure, housing, and economic development projects. This program is similar to TIFs, but rather than being location-based, it's project-based, which will allow smaller communities to use a portion of the increase in tax revenue to pay for projects that add to the grand list and grow the local economy. As I said in my budget address, critics will say this diverts money from the Ed Fund, but the reality is it does the complete opposite, which Secretary Curley will talk about more in a minute, along with some other housing investments. Again, I know we have a lot of challenges to address this session, but my team has proposed thoughtful, common sense policy changes to help us address what voters asked us to focus on: housing, affordability, education, and public safety. And I hope the legislature continues to work with us to deliver on what matters most to Vermonters. So with that, I'll turn it over to Commissioner Farrell.
Sure. Secretary, do you want to jump in first?
I think so. I'll grab one. Thank you, Governor. We like to switch things up now and then. I'm really grateful to have this opportunity to talk about Path for Vermont. This proposal calls for $50 million of investments to increase housing production and the infrastructure needed to support it. I'm going to walk you through the bulk of those investments. First, we have $9.1 million to create the Vermont Infrastructure Sustainability Fund, a low-interest revolving loan fund for infrastructure projects that will result in new housing units. We want to continue to support two successful programs run by our partner, the Vermont Housing Finance Agency. $15 million for VHFA's Rental Revolving Loan Fund, which creates rental housing middle-income units for middle-income households earning between 65% and 150% of the area median income. Last year, this program supported the creation of 265 new apartments. Then we'd like to support another $15 million to go to VHFA's Middle-Income Homeownership Development Program, which supports the construction of homes for households earning up to 150% of the area median income. Path for Vermont calls for $4 million for VHIP, the Vermont Home Improvement Program. This program gets a tremendous return on investment. It has helped bring more than 500 rental units back online with an average state investment of just $37,000 per apartment. We want to support $2 million for the Manufactured Home Improvement and Repair Program, which keeps Vermonters in their homes by fixing things like leaky roofs, broken heating systems, or updating electrical systems that are not up to code. And $2 million for the state Brownfields Revitalization Fund. The investments made by this fund are transformational. It cleans contaminated property and makes its redevelopment cost-effective for builders, discouraging the development of green spaces. Since October of 2021, the State Brownfields Revitalization Fund invested $21 million in 42 projects that have resulted in 700 new homes. Earlier, Governor Scott mentioned a tool called SPARK, which stands for Strategic Project for Advancing Rural Communities. This initiative is also outlined in Path for Vermont. SPARK allows smaller towns, including those damaged by recent flooding, to work with developers to make investments in things like water, wastewater, and housing. The funding mechanism for SPARK is similar to TIF, or tax increment financing, which Vermont has been using for decades. A common critique is that TIFs short the education fund. The fact is that without TIFs and the private investment and grand list growth they encourage, the contributions to the ed fund from these communities would never reach their potential. So I want to use Winooski as an example. Winooski's TIF started in 2004 and ended in 2024. Projects funded using TIF included water, sewer, and stormwater system improvements, development of a river walk overlooking the Winooski River, transportation enhancements and streetscape, the creation of Rotary Park, a municipal parking garage, and electrical substation improvements. That public investment spurred private investment that grew the grand list. Winooski's data shows us its TIF resulted in more than 400 new units of housing. Businesses report creating more than 800 jobs since at least 2013. They added at least 15 new storefronts. Commercial spaces like the Champlain Mill were reimagined. VSAC and the Community College of Vermont built new buildings. In 2004, Winooski contributed $519,000 to the Ed Fund. Winooski estimates it will send $2.1 million this year. And it's not just Ed Fund taxes that grew thanks to the investment. Sales, use, meals, and alcohol tax collections went from about $11.5 million in 2004 to about $40.5 million today, all because they used TIF to grow their grand list. SPARK is designed for much smaller projects in municipalities that don't have the same capacity to oversee something as complicated and arduous as TIF. Let's give our smaller towns SPARK so they can have a right-sized tool to help them revitalize their communities. Economic development and investing in the places we love should not be restricted to just our big population centers. Unlike previous legislative sessions, the administration has been called to testify on our proposals and ideas for accelerating housing. We hope these conversations continue as we anxiously await more detail on their priorities and ideas around housing. So that was a summary of our investment proposals, but as I've said this for years now, we cannot simply buy our way out of this problem, but we can turn the tide if we all work together. We need everyone to get in the game, especially when it comes to regulatory changes, which Commissioner Farrell will now speak about. Commissioner?
I'll go now. Always keep the governor guessing, right? Thank you, Secretary Curley. So I want to start by thanking the legislature for having us in very quickly in January to hear about the Path for Vermont bill. We're looking forward to collaborating with them and hearing about their ideas to increase home production and to break down some barriers for rural Vermont. I want to highlight two aspects of the Path for Vermont plan that haven't received as much attention and which may create some discomfort: appeals reforms and regulatory reforms. We recognize that some of these proposals could create sensitive conversations, but let's have the conversation. I've heard from some that we shouldn't improve the appeals process this year because we could discuss that next year, perhaps wait on a study. I've heard from some that it's too soon to improve on Act 181 because we should let things settle, and we should perhaps wait for a future legislative session to act, and others say we shouldn't reopen that conversation at all, and we've checked the regulatory reform box last year. I want to state clearly that we cannot wait. The data shows us that there's still urgency, and we need to address these items this session. Home building's complicated, it's unpredictable, and it's expensive. We are hearing from developers and home builders every day about the challenges that they face. And if we can make changes this year to improve conditions on the ground right now, why would we wait? It'd be easy to take the uncontroversial items in Path for Vermont, cast aside those trickier conversations, and just move forward with those. But then we'd be cutting out key solutions. The governor put all of these proposals into one bill for a reason, because they work together and they complement each other, and they need to stay together. These all have the same goal of increasing the pace of home building. So to remind folks of some of these provisions on appeals and regulatory reforms, we'll walk through a couple of them. So on appeals, we've proposed the following in Path for Vermont. Raise the standard for appeals to be brought against housing developments, reducing the likelihood of frivolous appeals. Raise the threshold for the petition appeal from any 20 people in a municipality to 20% of the municipality. Rebalance the appeals process to hold appellants accountable for some of the legal fees incurred by home builders in the process of defending an appeal. And reform the prioritization of the timeline in Superior Court to hear these cases. On land use, as the governor said, we need to extend the sunset of the Act 250 interim exemptions to provide a sufficient runway for communities of all sizes to move into this permanent exemption tiered structure. We need to expand the boundaries of these interim exemption areas to include all areas served by water and wastewater, not only to make better use of these community assets that taxpayers and our municipalities invested in, but also to double down on the density standards that we all established in the Home Act. Looking towards the permanent exemptions, we need to adjust the thresholds for Tier 1A and 1B to make the permanent Act 250 exempted areas more attainable for all communities. We need to change the Tier 1B to automatically grant these municipalities that are eligible their Tier 1B areas so that they can also benefit from streamlined permitting without having to take additional steps. On permitting, we've collaborated with our colleagues at the Agency of Natural Resources to propose the following reforms. Updated wetlands permitting standards in areas that are designed for growth, like our designated areas, these interim exemption areas, and these future Tier 1A and 1B areas. We've also proposed streamlined municipal water and wastewater permitting by delegating review to participating municipalities through a general permit. The point of this, these aren't broad deregulation attempts. These are very strategic and tactical proposals designed to increase home building and to double down on the initiatives that have proven to be effective. And these are based in data, these are based in research, and based in conversations that we're having with folks on the ground, what they need to be more effective, the folks trying to bring homes to our communities. We're hopeful that these important topics are going to get more time in these committees as they consider their housing proposals. And so that we can explain how all of these reforms work together. And I'll pass it back to the governor now.
Thank you, Commissioner. We'll open up to questions now.
Governor, in talking with some environmental advocates, they're saying that the grand bargain that was struck last year for, both the Home Act 2 years ago, but also the Act 250 bill last year, that was really difficult, and a lot of people gave concessions to get to that middle ground last year. How confident are you that some of these ideas can gather buy-in from everybody here in the building?
Well, again, the middle ground you're talking about is between the House and the Senate, I imagine, because it wasn't with the administration. I vetoed the bill, and I don't think it went far enough. And I know things are hard, but when you're in a situation where you have a crisis, and I saw all kinds of people running on the premise that we have a housing crisis on our hands. When you get to that point, things get difficult. You have to do things that are uncomfortable. And I'd say, we still have that crisis. Putting interim exemptions in didn't fix the problem throughout the next decade. and this isn't going to fix itself overnight. So I believe that we have to take steps now if we want to solve the problem that we see. It's not going to happen at this rate.
Have you had conversations with leaders in either the House or Senate about where housing is on the priority? I mean, I'm just thinking in House environment today, they're hearing a bill about hunting and baiting, sort of that conversation again. I mean,
I guess I would have to ask all of you, have I been unclear about what my priorities are this year? I mean, I've been clear with everyone. I gave a State of the State address, an inaugural address, that laid out the 4 areas that we have the most concern. So I just don't buy the fact that they don't understand what I believe are critical issues that we need to solve right now.
There's a bill today, it's a committee bill, so it doesn't have an exact number, but it's in House General and Housing throughout the week. Is that going to be the housing bill for this session you guys are working with lawmakers on, or can you speak to that specific committee bill at all?
I don't know what's in there. I just heard recently in the last hour or so that there was a bill that was a committee bill of some sort. That isn't what we've been talking about at all. We passed on the meat of our proposal on the first day of the session, I believe. So I know that they've been backed up in Ledge Council and haven't been able to, there's a lot of bills that are working their way through, but the committees know what our proposal is. And from what I understand, this doesn't match what we had put forward. So, but we'll see. I mean, there's a lot of time between now and then. We weren't given a heads up on this bill coming out, but we still have a lot of time to work our way through it.
school budget votes are coming up. Budgets have been warned, finalized, town meeting day voters. In a few weeks, we'll be voting. What's your message to voters this year as they're looking at increases in some districts?
Well, again, we had asked them to try and stay within a certain amount so that we could provide for some tax relief that we put forth in the general fund. So in the big bill that we're going to be asking the legislature to work with on for us. So we'll see. Be prudent. Make sure that you know what you're voting on, and whether it's in the realm of possibilities in terms of trying to keep our property taxes from increasing again.
It seems like one of the rubs this year with the universal school meals, that's part of the proposal to buy down property taxes this year. For some, that's drawn some concern. I mean, what other options do you think could potentially be on the table, if not rolling back universal school meals, to hold taxpayers harmless this year?
Well, we'll let the legislature work that out. I mean, we put forward a proposal that we thought was attainable, acceptable. We were asking to go back to what we had previous to universal meals, like a year ago. And I think that from my standpoint, asking less fortunate families support those more affluent families isn't the right approach. And I think that we need to roll that back and be more pragmatic, more reasonable in terms of what we see as a crisis in some respects and within the education funding issue. So we've been able to carve out $77 million to buy down those rates. If they don't want to go along with the universal meals, I'd say to fully buy that down, they'd have to come up with it somewhere else without raising taxes and fees, and we'll see where they go.
Another concern among lawmakers is the effect of your proposal on school choice in Vermont. Do you have an alternative governance consolidation framework that might resolve that issue if it proves to be insurmountable?
I think that this issue will work its way through. I mean, as I've said before, independent schools are important to us. School choice is important as well. We want to make sure that we separate those two because they're not always the same. School choice can be amongst public schools as well as with independent schools. So I think this can work its way through. I think there's some interest in the Senate in particular to try and make it happen.
If choice is a stumbling block over which you can't get, is there a way to do this without having school choice in these new
Well,
districts?
again, I think we're getting too far ahead of ourselves at this point. I know they have concerns, and I think we can work our way through that. So I don't believe that we have to go to, we don't address public school. We're not going to do away with independent schools and school choice. I mean, we have it. Franklin County's been using it for a long, long time. So I think they will resist going to something different. Maybe we just heard from those who have issues with the way we're doing it, but there are some, I would say, some areas of Vermont that count on school choice.
There are other education officials who are saying this doesn't address one of the major cost drivers that they're facing, which is healthcare costs. What would you propose to address the rising insurance costs?
Bringing more people in, turning over the demographic issue that we have today. We're not going to solve this problem, our healthcare issue, without bringing in more people, more taxpayers. Our demographics are, I believe, the root of almost all our crises that we face. Healthcare is one of them. Aging population without a backfill of a younger population is problematic. I think there should be some steps made on the federal level in terms of prescription drugs. I think that would help. I know our congressional delegation is working on that, and hopefully they'll make up some ground there. So the Vermont Care Board is doing all they can and working their way through it. And some of this, it's all uncomfortable because none of us want to be in this position. But we're going to have to make some difficult choices over the years and until we can bring in a younger, healthier population, more working class folks, and that means more housing. So that's why we think this issue that we're talking about today is immediate, and we need to fix it this year.
You've looked at increasing costs in the education system and made it the focus of your inaugural, your budget address, saying we have to do something about this. Why not do the same with the issue of healthcare?
Well, we can only handle so many crises. It's not as though we're not the only ones that can work on this, right? I mean, the legislature can work on this. Vermont Care Board can work on this. We have hospitals and the UVM medical network that's working on this. Blue Cross Blue Shield's working on this. I mean, it's not as though we're not addressing it at all. It's just that we need to solve some of the other issues as well, and we chose those issues. Now, next year, if nothing happens with the legislative process and addressing health care, we'll tackle that too. But I don't know how many crises we can face at one time, and we have to prioritize something.
You referenced a backup in Ledge Council and their workload. There seems to be sort of a sentiment that this session is moving slowly. Is there anything else you attribute that to?
Well, I mean, there are a lot of new legislators as well, trying to get acclimated to the process. I mean, I think that slows things down. A lot of new chairs, a lot of new faces. So I think it lends itself well, but I think the pace will increase and get through the mid-year, and it will accelerate. As you remember, last year, I think there was 100 bills passed within the last 9 days or something like that. So anything is possible.
It sounds like yesterday, Democratic and GOP leadership in the Senate have come to some agreement for education. They will extend the session if needed. I guess, where does, if you know, paper form of that bill potentially stand? And do you think this can get done in the session, or is this something that will have to be extended and lawmakers can't really leave, in your opinion, until something may be done?
Well, again, I think that we're all on the same page here. Something needs to be done now. I appreciate the pro tem's statement about we need to get this done this year. We'll extend the session if we have to. I think the speaker, maybe we've had conversations about that as well. So we'll see where it goes, but again, I think if everyone has the right attitude about wanting to make sure that we get something passed this year, it can get done. And we're a partner in this, but we're only a partner. We need 2 other partners to work with us.
Governor, a few weeks ago, as part of your affordability package that you put forward with tax relief, but also changes to some of the state's carbon reduction policies, rolling back private right of action, the Global Warming Solutions Act, and others. Do you think that the climate conversation, is that going to be addressed by the courts, do you think, or will that ultimately be addressed by voters?
Probably a combination of all the above. We certainly feel that we need to be more practical and more realistic in terms of what we can accomplish. Our goals are the same. It's just the pace and the expense of how we get there is important, because we can't continue to harm everyday Vermonters. We get there fewer and fewer of them in the working age population. So once again, we need to shift our demographics so that we're bringing in more workers and have more of the workforce, because they're willing to grow and expand, so we can bring in more resources to do the things we want to do. But until then, we have to prioritize what's important to Vermonters, and at the same time, continuing to move forward on our climate goals. It may be a different pace, but we're still moving forward.
What effect, if at all, do you think, well, it has had an effect with EV chargers, but the Trump administration coming in, some of the executive orders rolling back certain climate policies, I mean, like, what effect will that have here in Vermont?
Yeah, I'm not sure what effect any of that until we see something concrete. Have the highest number of EVs, I think, per capita in the nation, or close to it, maybe the top 5 anyhow. And we'd like to continue to work on our fast charging systems. I think that's important because that's been the excuse of many, and reason, maybe not excuse, but reason for many not to invest in EVs. They like them, but we need fast charging stations to accommodate them.
After
Anything you want to add to that? She wants to sit in the background.
after the election, as it relates to Donald Trump being elected, you said to Vermonters, we need to give him the opportunity to do better and to do the right thing. Does that general advice still stand?
He must not have been listening at that point. We still need to give the administration the opportunity to get their legs underneath them and become a little more sensitive to what they're doing. This upheaval across the nation, I don't think is healthy for us. And the pace at what they're trying to do, I don't think is healthy, and leads to dysfunction. So let's hope that cooler heads prevail, and that we don't keep going down this track for the foreseeable future. I mean, it's problematic, I believe. But at the same time, we shouldn't be surprised by any of this. This is what he campaigned on. I guess if there's any surprise on my part, it's just the pace at what he's trying to accomplish this all in this first 100 days.
And is it what he's doing or how he's going about doing it that you're concerned about?
It's probably how, as much as anything else. The what was probably predictable, but how he's doing it is an issue from my standpoint.
All right, we'll switch over to the phones. Keith Whitcomb, Rutland Herald.
Said no questions.
Kevin McCullum, 7 Days.
I'm going to take that as he has no questions. Still going to take that as no questions. Kevin, we can't hear you. Nope.
Let me see if I can throw it on here.
Just a second, Kevin, I think it's on our end.
Don't give in so quick.
Go now.
There was-
Oh, no. No, we're gonna get this to go.
Can we move on to see if Tim has any questions, then go back to Kevin? What's that?
Phone is on our end. Are there any more questions from the room, and then we can circle back to the phones?
The federal administration, my understanding, they've started to target some areas they've labeled as sanctuary jurisdictions. Is it a concern that attention could be turned towards Vermont or any of our municipalities?
We haven't experienced that yet, but it's always a concern. And again, it depends on the how. What it's not the what, but the how. And as I said before, if these are illegal immigrants that are here and causing disruption, serious crimes, violent crimes, and so forth, we'll be a willing partner in getting them removed. But if they're here and they're peaceful and they're working side by side with us, living here in our communities, I just don't think we should be wasting our time with that. We should, at that point, I think Congress should be working on how do we make those who are here peacefully and legally and part of our communities, how do we make that legal? How do we, something that they've kicked the can around for the last few decades, and they should just come, they have the power now, do something about immigration reform. And that's what they should be working on. But in the meantime, we'll be a partner in doing whatever we can to rid ourselves of those who are committing serious crimes here and violent crimes here in Vermont who are not here legally.
And does that philosophy, gel with the state's fair and impartial policing?
I believe so, yes.
What, if any, advice are you giving to public schools right now as they figure out what to do with this threat of withholding of federal funding if they don't disband DEI programs?
Well, I would say, look at, he's also talked about, again, getting rid of the whole Asian.
Switch it up.
Sorry, I got it.
Everyone put the Channel 5 thing on his microphone.
I would say look into whatever programs they are. I'm not sure if they're strictly DEI programs, but if they're tied to another program, there may be a way through that. I just don't know what they're going to do. But it's obviously a concern because we rely heavily on funding from the federal government. But we don't know what's going to happen. Again, back to the Agency of Education, he's also talked about dismantling that in its entirety. So I don't know what that means or what that looks like. Whether they just be grants to the states, I just don't know.
All right, give us 1 second, Kevin. We're going to try to get the sounds working again. Can you hear us, Kevin?
We could telephone his question.
That is just not meant to be today over there.
All right, you got a 2-2 tie.
It's gotta be this side of the podium, because this is where Calvin usually sets up.
We need to rough it up and give it a little grit over there.
See what happens when we work together.
Yes, yes.
Thank you.
When we're solving each other's problems.
Try one more time, Kevin.
How about now?
Yes.
I can hear you. This better be a good question.
So you guys can't hear me?
We can.
Okay.
Oh, great. Thank you. Sorry about all this. I'm pretty sure it is on your end, but who knows?
Yes.
Yes. We take full responsibility, Kevin.
I appreciate that. On that front, Governor, you touched on this a little bit about the federal delegation. My question is largely how you feel the federal delegation is responding to some of the discord that's coming out of Washington. Bernie Sanders is saying things like the nation is quickly moving toward authoritarianism. Peter Welch is basically saying things like, President Trump is on a rampage of illegality. And then there's others who say that the federal delegation isn't doing enough to blunt some of the trauma or upheaval that you're saying is problematic. So what's your take on the federal delegation and whether they're doing enough?
Well, I think they're doing all they can, and they're doing it in whatever manner that they see fit. I'm not going to tell them how to do their jobs. But from my standpoint, I don't want to give the administration what they're looking for. They love upheaval. They love controversy. And so that's why we've taken the stance that we're going to take each individual issue, try and break it down, and deal with the facts, and then report on what we find, and so that we are being realistic and we're being practical about the situation, because the last thing we need is to ramp up all the upheaval we're seeing, to ramp up and create more divide across our country. We need to come together and work together. And so I'm hoping that there'll be some reasonableness amongst governors. We'll see, but I think that's where the work really gets done. And I'm hopeful again that we can find a path forward over the next 4 years.
So our federal delegation has, a pulpit from which to address their concerns about what's coming out of the White House, and you, as one of the Republican governors, have a pretty big pulpit. Have you had any conversations with the White House about the way they're rolling out some of these changes, and have they been direct? Have they been back channel? I know they haven't been flamboyant, but have they been in existence?
I will say, we don't have a direct line to the White House, as you might imagine, even being a Republican governor, particularly because of some of the statements I've made. But having said that, we have had some dialogue with them. They've forewarned us about things over the last month or so. So that's a start. And we'll continue to try and foster that. And so I believe the best approach is to be reasonable and, take the emotion out of it and try and deal with whatever comes our way. Much like we do when we're experiencing an event, a pandemic or a flood or any other type of emergency. It's not good to get everyone riled up during an emergency. You want to provide for calmness and a path forward, and that's what we intend to do.
So does that mean you feel as though some of the comments by the federal delegation is counterproductive? Is it counterproductive to have Bernie Sanders say that Trump's leading toward authoritarianism and that Peter Welch is saying he's on a rampage?
Well, again, I'm not going to tell them how to. They're accomplished politicians. They've earned their right to be in the positions they're in. But that wouldn't be my style. It's just different. And I would hope at some point there'd be finding ways to work together on whatever issues that might come along, because they can't be opposed to everything that they're doing. There's got to be a path forward. And I just see this being a long 4 years if we're going to set this up and have so much controversy. It's unhealthy. It's just not healthy for people to be. They'll either engage and just be so emotionally charged, or they'll just back away and make like it isn't happening at all. And so we need a certain level of engagement, and I think that Vermonters and Americans should reflect on how do we make our country better, and how do we listen to one another, and how do we, because there are certainly ways to save money, which I've heard a lot about, but again, it's at the pace that they're going. Much like my criticism of the Global Warming Solutions Act, it's not as though I disagree with the policies, the long-range outlook. It's the pace of what they're trying to go that we can't afford. I would say the same thing for the administration. It's the pace. You know, you have to be reasonable, steps over time. Just, you know, sending notices to federal employees that they're no longer employed in masses doesn't seem like the right approach from my standpoint.
Got it. Thank you very much for your time.
All right, back to the room. We can take probably one more question.
Governor, also in the housing conversation, someone floated the idea nationally, but even here locally, taking a look at manufactured homes, prefab, built-in facilities, bring them onto a site, makes it potentially cheaper, easier. What do you think of it?
Yeah, no, I'm all for it. We've talked about this for quite some time. We've investigated some of the region's manufactured homes in Maine and in Canada, as a matter of fact. We had a facility here in Addison County at one time. Huntington Homes, right here next door, has been a leader in that small operation, but they're helping and doing that for a project in Middlebury. But it's not the total answer, right? It's one piece of the housing dilemma, because it's not just the building. You still have to have tradespeople to do the work to build them, even in the facility. It may be faster at that point, but you still have to put in the infrastructure, the utilities, the water, sewer, stormwater. You still have to put in the foundations, driveways, roads, and so forth. So it's not the total answer, but it helps in certain situations. So we're going to continue to work on that and try and reduce the costs in any way we can. But don't expect any major cost reductions with manufactured type of production homes.
Governor, we may also point them to the study we released. Sure. So yeah, so we released a study, and the governor is exactly right. The study that we VHFA and VITA and our team coordinated on points to a lot of these underlying infrastructure and regulatory mechanisms that need to be scaled up in order for that to be doable. Beyond that, then it's giving those manufacturers predictability, whether it's panelized, modular, manufactured. We need them to know that our regulatory system and our zoning here will be able to accept on some scale that many homes. But I would point people towards that report. It was very informative. Thanks.
Thank you all.